All right, well, let's get started here. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Turner. I am an archaeologist at not at Chaco Canyon, at Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. Um, I am also the vice president of the Hisatsinom Chapter of the Colorado Archaeological Society, which is co-sponsoring this evening's talk with Ruth Van Dyke. Before we get to her, let's do some of the housekeeping on Zoom and so on. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Taylor and Dylan, who are the masterminds who make this all happen. We're also very grateful to the Colorado Humanities and the National Endowment for Humanities for their CARES Act support last year, which helped us to maintain operations and create things like this webinar series. For anyone who might still be new to Zoom, a few ideas. If our heads are getting in the way of seeing the beautiful photographs, you can just click on the window and move us out of the way. We do have a live transcription. I think it's working. Yeah, it looks like it's available on Zoom today. So it's like closed captioning if you want a transcript as Ruth is talking. It doesn't work perfectly with archaeological terms, but it might be a little helpful. And if it's in your way, you can also turn that off. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box rather than in the chat box. It's a lot easier. We get a lot of questions and it's easier to monitor if they're all in one place. If you're having any problems with Zoom, you can always watch this on Facebook Live on our live stream. And if you have trouble with that, this will be on YouTube later. All of our webinars are on YouTube, so you can check it out later. And you can also subscribe to us on YouTube, which is helpful to us as far as metrics and so on. For those who are not familiar with Crow Canyon, our mission here is to empower present and future generations by making the human past accessible and relevant through archaeological research, experiential education, and American Indian knowledge. Crow Canyon acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Diné, Jicarilla, Apache, and Paiute people on whose traditional homelands we work and reside. We are grateful to all Indigenous people who continue to preserve and protect cultural traditions, maintain ancestral relationships, and steward these lands. The work at Crow Canyon would not be possible without recognizing and honoring the many generations of people that we learn from every day. And while we're on that topic, I'm going to give a shout out to Deb Holland, who I watched her take the oath of office this morning. Very exciting. Upcoming webinars next week, we have Dr. Ben Bellarato back again to tell us about some tree ring dates from south of the Bears Ears. And the week after that, we have Dr. Steve Sims talking about prehistoric irrigation in central Utah. As always, we like to share some places where you can donate, make a difference. As you know, the Pueblo folks and Native American people throughout the country have been really hard hit by COVID, and these are some reputable charities. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Ruth Van Dyke. Dr. Van Dyke is a professor of anthropology at Binghamton University in upstate New York, where she was my PhD advisor. Ruth's research employs landscape archaeology to investigate the rise and decline of the Chaco phenomenon. She is editor of 6 books, which this is the one we all know and love, but there are many others, and including a new book that I'm hoping that she'll be talking about today, called The Greater Chaco Landscape: Ancestors, Scholarship, and Advocacy. All right, Ruth, I will stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. I will begin sharing my own screen here in just a moment. Pause for technical, etc. Let's see. Okay, and that is actually the title of our book, not the title of this talk, but a beautiful sort of introductory picture here. So hello, everyone. I am Dr. Ruth Van Dyke. It's my pleasure to be speaking with you all today, and I'm very pleased to be partnered up with the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center and the Hisatsinom Chapter of the Colorado Archaeological Society to be bringing you this talk. I want to reiterate and underscore the land claims acknowledgements that Michelle just made. I would not be able to do any of my work at Chaco or elsewhere in the Southwest without the support and the deep history of Pueblo and Diné and Apache and Ute and Paiute peoples, O'odham peoples, all of whom, of course, have a very long history on this land and whose ancestors are the folks that I've been very privileged to work on studying throughout much of my career. So I just want to underscore that that's a very important part of all of this. I also want to, I guess, give a bit of a disclaimer. I realized in kind of thumbing through my slides here before the talk, this is a talk that I've been giving a lot this spring, and I'm mostly giving it to audiences that don't know anything about Chaco. So what I'm going to do here, the first part of the talk is kind of like, have any of you ever been to Chaco Canyon? No? Well, here's what Chaco is. But since we have people in the audience, such as I see Dr. Steve Lexon, my good friend, as well as maybe quite a few others who actually are in the Southwest, in New Mexico, or have certainly been to Chaco more than once. The first part of the talk might be just a lot of pretty pictures for all of you and a bit of review. So just warning you that that's kind of the first part of the talk. But then I'll get into a little bit of more current research on the viewscapes and soundscapes in Chaco. And then, yes, I will, in fact, wind up talking about a project that I've been privileged to undertake with Dr. Carrie Heitman from the University of Nebraska, and also Steve Lexon. He actually is the one who got the ball rolling on the project. And it's culminating after about 7 years in a book that is about to be released. So I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. All right, so this is the introductory part, right? I'm guessing all of you know where the Southwest of North America is and where Chaco Canyon is located. In case you don't, here's a little orienting graphic for you. And here's a beautiful National Geographic photo overview of Chaco Canyon and Pueblo Bonito on the Colorado Plateau. So as I'm sure many of you know, Colorado Plateau, it's high, it's dry, 5,000 to 7,000 feet above sea level, and was home to ancient Native Americans for over 10,000 years, and was home to farmers, people who were farming, particularly from the first millennium of the Common Era to the present. So Chaco Canyon, as again you probably all know, was a really important place between about 850 and 1150 AD. Why do we all get so excited about Chaco Canyon? Well, part of the attraction is, of course, the monumental architecture. Depending on how you count them, there are maybe about 12 great houses in Chaco Canyon. And of course, Pueblo Bonito is probably the most famous and one of the best known. This beautiful Adriel Heisey aerial photograph is also, I believe, the cover of one of Steve Lexon's books. And Pueblo Bonito here, you can see, has a lot of the characteristics common to all Chaco great houses. So very nice symmetrical looking layout, lots of enclosed kivas, very large rooms when compared with domestic Pueblo sites of the same time period. Pueblo Bonito has multiple stories. It actually has many hundreds of rooms. So again, great houses. They're a Chaco Canyon thing. And of course, they coexist with great kivas. This photo, which was taken with one of those camera lenses that kind of squishes things, is one of the great kivas in, I believe, in the plaza of Pueblo Bonito. But it's a great illustration that fit onto one frame here, which is actually kind of hard to do, of this large circular semi-subterranean masonry-lined structure with very formal floor features and a lot of symmetry, and again, very specific kinds of orientations, often to north-south or along the major axis of the great house. Great houses go up into the sky, great kivas go down into the earth, and those are just two of the many ways that some of us see balanced dualisms as expressed in Chacoan architecture and on the Chacoan landscape. There's a lot of kind of playing around with things that are very visible and things that are hidden, or things that go up into the sky and things that go down into the earth. And great kivas and great houses existing next to each other in the same space are just two of the more kind of dramatic ways in which we see that idea expressed in architecture. But of course, the monumental architecture, fascinating and attractive as it is not all that there is to Chaco. There are a couple hundred, at least, small domestic sites in the canyon. And a lot of these are on the south side of the canyon, but in fact, they're not all on the south side, they're all around. And these look like your basic small domestic Pueblo II period, or late Pueblo I through early Pueblo III period pueblos, with kivas out front, not actually enclosed in the rooms, and with nice big piles of middens and domestic refuse. And people were clearly living in the small pueblos and farming. It's less clear what people were up to during some of the later stages in the great houses in Chaco. And we also have road segments. The two most famous of these are the North Road and the South Road, which lead due north in the case of the North Road and kind of south-southwest in the case of the South Road. Here you see our old friend and colleague Bob Powers walking on a cleared segment of part of a road just overlooking Chaco Canyon here. I think this photograph was taken, I think it was given to me actually by Tom Wines and taken during the Chaco project. But this gives you a good idea of what an excavated road segment would look like. And then if we make that go away, you can see a couple of the endpoints of the Chaco roads. So the Great North Road definitely goes to Coots Canyon, which is not far outside of Farmington. Probably a lot of you have been there, and possibly descends into the canyon by means of some kind of a modified staircase, according to Mike Marshall and Anna Sofair. And then, of course, if we follow the Lexon view, continues on up towards Aztec. If we follow the Marshall and Sofair view, actually ends here at Coots. We can talk more about that later in the Q&A. That could be fun. But the point is that it goes due north to at least this point, and then seems to go to a down place. The South Road goes through South Gap and towards Hosta Butte, which you can maybe see on the horizon there. I hope you guys can all see my little arrow jumping around. And this is a photo taken from a stone circle, which actually overlooks Pueblo del Arroyo. And then we're looking through South Gap towards Hosta Butte. So while it doesn't go due south, it seems to be indicating let's go to an up place. And Mike Marshall originally said, and I thought he was dead right, so I kind of used and expanded on this argument, that I think that this is one of the many ways that during high Chaco times, which is like late 1000s, 1060, 1080 up until about 1100, 1120, that the Chacoans are actually deliberately creating a landscape, using architecture and roads to create a landscape that emphasizes ideas like up and down or like north and south. And what they're doing is they're balancing Chaco Canyon itself as the center place, as kind of the fulcrum around which everything else revolves. And of course, another dimension to Chaco Canyon as a fulcrum around which everything else revolves involves the sun and the moon and the stars. Beautiful star wheel photograph here taken by some of my videography colleagues, Cloudy Ridge Productions, which is Larry Reese and David Valentine, just to illustrate for you the northerly direction of a lot of the architecture, and of course the Great North Road in Chaco. Again, something that's featured so prominently in the work of my colleague Steve. And then of course, we all know about the sun dagger and other markings in Chaco that indicate that Chacoans really cared about solstices. They really cared about equinoxes. They really cared about the lunar standstills. And Chaco Canyon, again, seems to be kind of marked as the place around which the sun and the moon revolve. So center place. So, I've written a lot about that. You all probably are well aware of a lot of that. But a part of Chaco that is less well studied and perhaps less understood has to do with the greater Chaco landscape, Chaco beyond Chaco Canyon, which is huge and very complicated. Here's a map created by Archaeology Southwest that is one version, the latest incarnation of the measle map of Chaco and Outliers that goes all the way back to the 1980s Chaco project, or maybe even earlier, where we've got Chaco Canyon here on the Chaco River, and then look at all these dots. And here they're coded as to whether they have both great houses and kivas or more, or earlier, later, etc. But look at all these dots. If you count these up, I think there's something like 280, 283. And these are, of course, the outliers that have something to do with whatever's happening, whatever Chaco is during particularly its heyday between, again, like about 1050, 1100, 1150. Chaco's the center of something that reaches an area, covers an area that is the size of the state of Alabama. 60,000 square miles, I believe, is the estimate. And when I gave this talk recently in the UK, they were like, well, put that in British terms. How big is it? And it turns out this is bigger than the entirety of Great Britain. So, it's big, right? And a lot of you guys are in the Southwest, so this is not news to you. It's a big landscape. What do these outliers look like? Here's one of my favorites, and this is a particularly nice one. This is Quinviniola, which is part of the Chaco Additions. It's actually part of Chaco Culture National Historical Park, and it's got this lovely great house that's got several stories. It's a nice E shape. It's got some enclosed kivas up here. You can see one of them right here. And it's facing to the southeast. And this would feel right at home in downtown Chaco. It's the same kind of size, same kind of configuration as something like Hungopavi, for example. Most of the Chaco outlier great houses, though, look more like this. This is another really, really awesome one, though. It's one of my favorites, called Peach Springs. This one is part of the Chaco Protection Sites group, which are a number of outlier great houses that are administered or managed by a joint team that involves not only the park, but also the various federal agencies and tribes on whose land these outliers are. So this one happens to be on the land of the Navajo Nation. But you can see that what it looks like here is kind of like a giant rubble mound. And this has been mapped very, very nicely. We understand a lot more about it than just what you see here today. But what you see walking up to it, you see a big pile of rocks covered with artifacts because, walls fall down. So over the last 20 years or more, I don't know, I've devoted a lot of time to working in outlier communities and trying to understand not only the great houses and great kivas that are found in outlier communities, but the communities themselves, right? Because these great houses aren't just isolated on the landscape. They usually are in the midst of communities of small domestic structures, similar to the ones that I showed you in Chaco Canyon earlier. And there's usually maybe like 20 to 40 small sites. And they usually cover an area of maybe like about a mile radius, but sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller. These outlier communities, some of them are very well documented because for various reasons, historical reasons usually, people have happened to do a lot of work there. So like Peach Springs, for example, very well documented by our late colleague Bob Powers and his associates. There's probably, and here I'm just guessing off the top of my head, but there's probably, 20, 30, maybe as many as 40 outlier communities that we actually really understand a lot about the small sites. But that's out of, again, remember, something like 280. So depending on how you count, right? Any way you want to slice this, we don't know very much about most Chaco outliers. So over the years then, I've been involved in a lot of research in some of these communities to try to understand more about what they look like and their structure. I was very privileged to work with a graduate student who is now employed at Crow Canyon, now Dr. Kellum Throgmorton. He may be out there if he is. Hello, Kellum. And this is actually his map from his dissertation work in one of these outlier communities called Morris 40. And Kellum was able to use remote sensing technologies, magnetometry in particular worked pretty well, to not only do a little bit more with expanding the dots that we were aware were on the landscape, representing additional small sites, but also looking at where buried subterranean features like the pit structures were with respect to the small sites. So we have a lot better understanding now about this community, as well as another one that Kellum worked in as a result of that work. And if you're interested in Kellum's particular take on outlier great houses lighthouses and on their relationships to Chaco Canyon, I direct you to his absolutely brilliant dissertation and or any talks that he might be giving in the near future, or publications that he might be coming out in the near future. Maybe if he is online, we can get him to talk more about that when we're all done. So I'm really privileged to work with a lot of other folks who are also really interested in outlier communities. So here we are back to kind of the core map to just remind you of how many of these things there are. And here you see kind of sketched out schema of some of the major roads. And, it's not true that all roads lead to Chaco, because they're not all connected to Chaco by roads. And that's one of the things that we're all really interested in continuing to research and trying to figure out. I mean, I have colleagues who've been working using LiDAR data, looking particularly in this area up here, in this area out here. We're trying to understand, are the roads supposed to link to Chaco, or are they supposed to link to maybe dramatic landforms or ideas like earlier when I suggested the North Road going to a down place and the South Road going to an up place? Is that what they're about? Is it a grab bag of different things? Another young archaeologist, Rob Weiner, who's working with Scott Ortman up at CU Boulder, I believe, is working on some of these problems for his dissertation. So stay tuned, right? We may be able to sort that out. But of course, this is a vast landscape, right? And we've got to collect the data. We've got to figure out how to figure out exactly where all these things are. I mean, we know where some of them are because aerial photography, et cetera. And then we need to actually figure out how to, assess their ages, which is really difficult, and what they were for. So that's ongoing research. So I see Chaco as a place that attracted. I think Chaco is a place that sucked a lot of people in from these outlier communities, particularly during its heyday. I think that people came to Chaco, they brought a lot of stuff to Chaco, they left that stuff in Chaco. And of course, that isn't just my work, that's other Chaco scholars' work going back again many, many decades. They seem to have been attracted to Chaco by a number of things. And part of it is, of course, the celestial events that might have been celebrated there. Part of it seems like there must have been some pretty exotic rituals going on in Chaco. A couple of months ago, I heard my colleague, Dr. Patricia Crown from the University of New Mexico, give a bang-up talk about their work in Room 28 and their new book, House of the Cylinder Jars. And of course, as I know you probably all know, what Dr. Crown has very effectively demonstrated is that people in Chaco are drinking cacao or some kind of similar drink out of cylinder vessels. I mean, who knew, right? So really amazing things are going on in Chaco, and I think that's attracting people. I think that the fact that Chaco becomes a central important place, it's kind of a ball rolling downhill. So ancestors are there and people want to come and visit the ancestors and maybe honor the ancestors in some way. We have a lot of time depth in Chaco, actually going back, into basket maker times. But then I also think, and I've emphasized this a lot in my work, that the topography of the canyon itself proved to be pretty special for these ancient people. Looking out at the sky, looking up at the stars, looking across the Colorado Plateau, looking at high places, thinking about directionality, thinking about up versus down and those kinds of dualisms. I think that these are ideas that are really, really deep in Pueblo culture. That they go back, into basket maker. Maybe they go back earlier than that. They're certainly very, very present today. And if you're in Chaco Canyon and you're looking around, this is particularly easy to see if you're up on a high place, like up on the North Rim or up on West Mesa. You're looking around, you realize Chaco Canyon is really kind of unique because it's in this kind of shallow bowl of the San Juan Basin that's drained by the Chaco River and that goes up to the San Juan River. It's in this kind of bowl, but the canyon itself was carved through this escarpment, Chakra Mesa, and its kind of associated bits there. It was carved to be this high place. So you got this high place that's bisected by the Chaco River, and then that's in the middle of this low place. And so just by virtue of that, by virtue of the geology of it, the topography of it, it becomes this special place that juxtaposes high and low. And if you're up on a high place, you can see almost the entire Chaco world. You can see very, very, very far. If you were up on Fajada Butte, you could see, I am sure, a great deal of the Chacoan world. And Fajada Butte itself is, of course, a very exceptional looking place. As you all know, if you've been into Chaco Canyon, you can see it from a really long ways away. I mean, next time, if you're driving along 550 from Farmington and you're headed to the road where you turn to go into Chaco Canyon to the park today, start looking around Nageezi, or maybe a little earlier, start looking south, because you'll be really surprised. You'll see it popping up there and you'll be, could it be? Yes, it is Fajada Butte. Same thing pertains if you're coming in from the South Road. Just think about like how far this thing was visible. And we're not approaching Chaco today, of course, in the same way that people were in the past. They were walking in. They were likely walking in on prescribed routes. Some of those routes, I suspect, might have been those roads. And something about the ways in which people were supposed to walk probably was heightening that kind of sense of, okay, we're going to the center place. So all of these things, I think, are attractive to people who are dwelling at the Outliers. And so in my view, I think Chaco was very much some kind of central place, some kind of pilgrimage center, if you will. And here I will just run through the laundry list of evidence that I feel supports this particular interpretation. As I've just stated, the lure of the compelling topography, the ancestors, the symbolism, the celestial events, continuity with contemporary Pueblo peoples for whom pilgrimages to sacred places are very important. The monumental architecture that's suitable for performance spaces or accommodation of large groups. I'm not going to delve into this with a lot of detail, but we needed a lot of labor to build those great houses. And the tree ring dates suggest that this happened in bursts. But we don't seem to have, I mean, this is controversial, but we don't necessarily seem to have evidence for a huge population in Chaco Canyon. So it makes a lot of sense that maybe what you have are a lot of people coming into Chaco Canyon to gather periodically and build stuff, and then they go back home. Maybe when they're coming in to build stuff, they're actually carrying logs too from the west and then going back home. We have the Outliers themselves and the roads, which indicate there's some kind of a spread of similar ideas and similar architecture. And then, of course, last but not least, we have the fact that so many materials, particularly exotic materials, come into Chaco Canyon and stay there. They don't get redistributed. They don't go back out. As Michelle already graciously said, I wrote a lot about Chaco as a center place in this book. But since this book, I've continued to think a lot, particularly about visibility and about sound. And so first, just a little bit about visibility and the ways in which intervisibility on the Chaco landscape links things together. As I stated earlier, we know that for Dene peoples, for Pueblo peoples today, for Apache peoples for that matter too, high places are very important. And what you can see across the landscape is very important. Certain mountain peaks are sacred, storied places where important events happened in the past, or important people lived in the past. And so for people today, a distinctive peak like Fajada Butte, it has a story, it has a particular meaning, and I think that's almost certainly the case deep into antiquity, right? We have the dramatic topography itself, we have the solar and the lunar phenomena, and then we have a lot of great houses and features on high places. So being interested in great houses and similar features that are located on high places, I've been really interested to kind of study from whatever angle I can to try to understand whether having those features on high places actually create like a view net or a network that links all of the Chacoan world together by virtue of what you can see. And you can think of a lot of reasons why this might be desired by the Chacoans, right? I mean, signaling just to kind of send messages out or tell everybody, hey, the feast is in 3 days. That could be one of them, right? But another piece of it might simply be a matter of a sense of identity, a sense of belonging. If you can see back to Chaco, or Chaco can see you, you feel like you're part of something. It's kind of like, okay, personal story, but maybe some of you have experienced very similar things. I'm not in Cortez, Colorado right now, but I do have a home near there in Yellow Jacket. And for me, that really feels like that's really feels like my home place. And whenever I'm coming back to Cortez, whenever I can see Sleeping Ute Mountain, then I just feel this tremendous sense of, oh, thank goodness, I'm almost there. I'm back on my landscape. Well, I mean, I think we've all had similar kinds of experiences, right, with different places that are important to us, particularly on the Colorado Plateau. And so I'm thinking for Chacoans too, if you could see maybe a particular mountain or a particular peak or Fajada Butte, you realized, okay, I'm within Chaco now, or I'm home, or I'm part of this thing. So for all of these reasons, I want to try to understand more about intervisibility along the Chacoan world. Now, a lot of folks have done experiments, and here you see one of my buddies, an avocational archaeologist who's done a lot of great work flashing mirrors from high places across the Chacoan world, particularly enigmatic rock features that we sometimes call shrines, although we don't really know what they are. And flashing mirrors actually works pretty well to connect Chaco Canyon up the North Road to Piers. And I think here what we're doing, I believe this is actually on a Crow Canyon trip. And what we're doing is we're demonstrating that you can flash mirrors between the end of the North Road at Coots Canyon and Twin Angels, which is an outlier not far up Coots Canyon. So flashing mirrors is great, but 283, right? How are we going to model that? So thank goodness for my good colleague and former Crow Canyon Research Center director, Dr. Kyle Wyszynski, because he is a GIS wizard. And so we got together with Tom Wines, who has a tremendous amount of data that he shared with us. And also Tucker Robinson, who some of you may know actually now runs Wild Edge Brewery. God bless him. But he was still an archaeologist back in the day, and he worked on this with me for a while too. And anyway, we downloaded every scrap of data that we could find with respect to locations of great houses, as well as enigmatic rock features on high places. And we put this all into a massive GIS database. And Kyle had the digital elevation models, and we tried to account for things like how tall were you, and how big was the great house, et cetera. And we did a lot of modeling. This is just one of the many beautiful maps that Kyle made from a publication that we had come out in American Antiquity 5 years ago now. Oh yeah, here it is down here, if any of you are interested. And basically what we were able to show was that the answer is yes. The great houses on high places and the enigmatic features, the shrines on high places, they do seem to tie everything together. And this does seem to be pretty important, particularly in the late 1000s. Since then, some of my colleagues, particularly, I'm not sure where they're all based now, but University of Arizona was part of this. Barbara Mills, Catherine Dungan, I think she was the lead author on a really terrific study that came out in Antiquity a couple of years ago. And they kind of revisited what we did, and they tweaked it a little bit in some interesting ways. But one of the things that they looked at was whether it really looked like people were intentionally siting great houses in places to maximize their visibility. Because as they pointed out, well, a lot of high places kind of could be coincidental, but they found that in fact, their work supported ours. They found that in fact, yeah, it looks like great houses are intentionally situated in places to maximize their visibility. So that's, there's still lots more to do here, but I'm really happy that I think I can say that this kind of intuitive idea that visibility over long distances was important for the Chacoans, and that's really borne out here. So if we drill down a little bit into a site with excellent visibility that's on the Great North Road, we can segue into some of the sound studies and also into some of the politically engaged activist part of the work that I know some of you are probably anticipating or looking forward to us getting to. So this is an outlier called Piers. Maybe some of you have been there. It's only about 15 kilometers north of Chaco Canyon. And here I'm just zooming down on that same map I've been showing you from Archaeology Southwest. So here's the canyon, and then here's the North Road, and here we got Piers, right? So we drill down into Piers. So what is, and that's kind of a pun, but not really. So what are we looking at here? Well, we've got a really interesting, complex outlier community, again, wonderfully mapped by a number of colleagues in the past, and not least Bob Powers. So we've got two big great houses on top of this mesa. You can see one of them poking up here, and here's an aerial view, and I've got my zoom heads are blocking me, so I can't see everything I'm showing you here, but you can see kind of what that looks like. It's of the rubble mound variety. We've also got some other very enigmatic, weird, large structures down on the valley floor. We've got about, I want to say 20 offhand community sites of various iterations. Some are habitations, some are like limited activity sites. And then we've got the Great North Road. This is not the Great North Road. This is a contemporary gravel road. But the Great North Road coming through kind of about here on the other side of the Great House up the valley, okay? And it's wending its way north to Coots Canyon. So this is a pretty important landscape to think about with respect to visibility back to Chaco. And yes, there is intervisibility between here and Pueblo Alto, so it is linked to Chaco visibly. But and visibility has been really fun to play with, but it also got us thinking about sound. What about sound? And so some of my colleagues along this line have been doing some really interesting work. There's a Chaco scholar at SUNY Buffalo called David Witt, who got together with a colleague named Christy Primo, and they developed a way to model sound inside Chaco Canyon. They again used GIS, and they used some DEMs, and they took some they assumed some certain like parameters, like it's dawn on the summer solstice morning to account for humidity and what have you. And they were modeling the reach of a conch shell trumpet blast inside the canyon. Well, I looked at that work and I went, well, this is really fascinating. I wonder if we could try this in an outlier community. So we did. So what we did was we got the acoustic parameters for how far and how loud a conch shell blast would be. We followed the lead of Witt and Primo. We basically did the same kind of programming that they did. And my colleague Tim DeSmet at Binghamton University actually did the modeling. I was the idea person. He did all the computer work. So if you have a computer question, I cannot answer it, but I can direct you to him. So basically we put all these variables into the hopper, right? And we had all of our community location sites, and we had these DEMs for the landscape that were actually collected by LiDARs. They were really accurate. And we waited for 24 hours for the program to run, because there's so many variables, it takes forever for these things to crunch. And what came out was this. Tim rendered this really beautiful colorized drawing here to show, but these are the two great houses here. So Great House A and Great House B at Piers. And then Area C is one of the funky like structures that's down low. And El Faro and this Atalaya are two interesting structures that are up high. The road would be this line right here, I believe. Not sure why it doesn't, keeps going here. Okay. And all of the other black dots are community sites. So you can see that, in fact, the conch shell blast at dawn, as we've modeled it, reaches all the community sites. And what's really interesting is that where the conch shell trumpet blast stops is right about where the community stops. So we looked at this and went, well, that's really cool. I wonder if it would work again. And I don't think in this particular talk, I don't have the graphic to show you, I'm sorry, but let me just tell you, we tried it at one more outlier community and it worked again perfectly. That was at Bisani, where we also have really great data for the location of the community. So what we need to do now is try it at a lot more, because I'm wondering now if there isn't something. I mean, obviously there's a lot of decisions, a lot of factors that go into play when you're deciding where to situate your house, right? Your farming house on the outlier community landscape. But do you want to make sure that you're within earshot of the conch shell trumpet at dawn on the morning of the solstice? And could this be another way for us to figure out how big and what the kind of configuration of outlier communities are? Because like I said at the outset, right now, we only have really good data on kind of a large handful of outlier communities. And there are many factors, which we'll get to in a minute, that are rapidly eating up the landscape in and around outlier communities. The great houses themselves tend to be protected, but the greater landscape, where the habitation sites are, where road segments are, where maybe other kinds of enigmatic features are, where rock art is, that kind of stuff, oftentimes we don't even know it's there. So what if we could go outlier by outlier and do this kind of modeling around the great houses, and then we'd be able to kind of draw some circles and say, hey, it looks like this area here might be the community. And this is important too, because you can't just say, okay, it's a mile radius, because there's topography, and sometimes communities don't make a nice round shape. So anyway, so that's something that we have yet to do, and we haven't done it yet, partly because this is an insane amount of computing power, but we're going to be working on it. So watch for this in the future. So we're up there on top of the mesa at the great houses, and we're looking out, and what do we see in contemporary times? Well, yes, this is where the talk takes a dark turn. This is what we see. This is one of many oil and gas rigs that encircle the outlier of Piers and the Piers community at present. Now, no laws have been violated here, okay? I'll make that very clear. While Piers is protected by various mechanisms, part of Chaco protection sites, and the Great House itself, I believe, is state land. Anyway, nobody's drilling into the Great House, but in the general area, not all of that's protected land, right? So here we see a rig, and this is 650 meters away. So, not that far. And while we were up there, the guy happened to drive up to service the rig. So here he is in his little truck. In fact, if you're standing up at Piers and looking around, you see rigs encircling you on the entire horizon. And so this is my colleague Carrie Heitman is up here with Dr. Julian Thomas, who is over from the UK with us, running around looking at outliers. And here you see rig 8, rig 9, Rig 1 is over here. There's the Great House in case your eyes are having a hard time tuning to it. And here's another map done by Kyle Bashinsky showing you all of the rigs that you would see from the top of the Piers Great House. So here's that Great House A and B area of Piers in red. Everything in yellow you can see from that area, from Piers Great Houses. And of course, all the little blue balloons are oil and gas rigs. And here's another illustration. So we're out at that oil and gas rig, the one that I showed you in the picture before, that's 650 meters away, looking back, and there's the two great houses. So what's effectively happened here in the heart of the oil patch between Farmington and Chaco, as many of you know, this has turned into an industrial landscape now. And again, I mean, no laws are being broken, but what's happening is there's a lot of bending happening, in my opinion, so that rigs are just going in left and right, rig roads are going in left and right, and this really fragile landscape full of so much information that we haven't collected, so many things that we don't understand in terms of soundscapes, viewscapes, roads, rock art, shrines, etc., extensive communities, it's being chewed up. Tim DeSmet also did this model for us, and this is actually taking the decibel level of a pump jack, like the one I've been showing you, and showing you how loud they are. So it's not just about what you can see, but it's also about what you can hear. Here's Piers in the middle, and then all of these look like little volcanic eruptions here. These are all pump jacks clanking away. Now, the drilling companies have been asked to put mufflers on some of the more egregious of these. They have done so, but nonetheless, this amounts to cumulative adverse impacts in my mind to this really fragile landscape. As many of you probably know, together with partners like Archaeology Southwest, a lot of archaeologists are really unhappy about this, and we're trying to work as hard as we can for some protections of this landscape. And we're trying to get the various agencies, it's primarily the BLM and the BIA, who are leasing to these oil and gas companies, to actually do consulting with native groups ahead of the leases, and to actually do large-scale archaeological survey and figure out what's out there before the leases. But the horses essentially already left the barn. This is a map provided to me by Paul Reed at Archaeology Southwest. And what you're looking at here, this is Chaco Canyon. Everything in blue is already leased. Okay, already leased. It's been leased for a while too. Okay, so if you were watching Deb Holland up there talking to Steve Manchin or Joe Manchin last week during her hearings, yay Deb Holland. I watched a part where he very pointedly was grilling her about why is she anti-jobs? Why is she anti-leasing? She's anti-job. She's anti-oil and gas. And she was like, listen, it's almost all already been leased. Those jobs already exist, okay? And I mean, there's no question here that we need to coexist with oil and gas. None of us think that we can or should just completely shut it down. But what we would really like to see is responsible behavior where we actually do a very, very thorough reckoning, a very thorough evaluation of the importance of these places, particularly to descendant communities, and a very thorough archaeological assessment of what's actually out there before we lease, not do like a piecemeal, okay, you've got a lease, better send out a CRM firm to make sure there's no sites within this tiny little footprint. Okay, there isn't, okay, good, put in your rig road, right? Because that's resulted in this. This line here is, of course, the proposed 10-mile buffer zone around Chaco Canyon that would potentially prohibit any new leases from those areas. We'll talk more about that in a few. So I got involved on this thing at the behest, actually, of, again, Steve Lexon, who maybe should be a co-author on this paper. I'm mentioning him so much, but he is a good friend and colleague. But anyway, Steve called me up about, 7 or 8 years ago and basically said, hey, listen, the Park Service would like us as archaeologists, as academic archaeologists, to think about the greater Chaco landscape and maybe try to come up with some guidelines or some help in terms of how can we manage this? How can we better study this? How can we better understand it? So I brought in another good friend and colleague, Dr. Carrie Heitman at University of Nebraska, and the three of us for a while were working on this project that's kind of morphed into something we're calling the Greater Chaco Landscape Project. And we did a lot of things in association with this. We started off with a big meeting with every stakeholder that we could think of, including every tribe and pueblo and agency and CRM firms, people who were interested in working on the Greater Chaco landscape. We followed that up. We wrote a white paper that the park and other government agencies have been using as a management tool, so we're happy about that. We've had a series of other meetings as well, things like trying to kind of finalize that big database that created the big Archaeology Southwest map. That was in partnership in part with them, with Matt Peoples. And then finally, we had a meeting at Crow Canyon in 2017, and we invited a lot of folks to come and do kind of the more usual academic presentation of papers type of thing. And the meeting was initially kind of facetiously titled The Greater Chaco Landscape, What We Know and What We Don't. But what we really wanted to do was explore with our colleagues, what are the different kinds of things that we don't yet understand about this, and how can we do better? So out of that emerged, first of all, two really important points. Here, I think, are the two most important points that have come out of our project. Outlier great houses, as I'm sure you've gathered from listening to me here, are not points in a vacuum. They have to be understood within their larger landscapes. And secondly, and more importantly, this is a very important landscape for descendant communities. Tribal consultation about these cultural landscapes needs to be happening before leases are granted, not after. And we need to be protecting these places for descendant communities. I'm an archaeologist. I care about the archaeological knowledge, but I 100% support the reality here that for descendant communities, that's a whole nother level of importance, right? Like, this is your home. This is your ancestors. This is where your ancestors are. We have to listen and honor and respect that. So we want to make these 2 points as forcefully as we can. And one of the things that we ended up doing was the traditional academic thing. We decided to collect all of our various papers and ideas and things into a book. But, not everybody involved in investigating Chaco wants to or feels it is most appropriate to simply write a chapter in a book. Plus, this is the 21st century, and we have access now to all kinds of wonderful online technologies like the one we're using right here. So what we decided to do is we decided to make this a multimedia online project. And so it does exist, it will exist as a physical book, but it will also exist as an ebook/website. And we realized that what we could do was incorporate videos of a lot of what we were talking about. So first thing we did was we filmed everybody who was speaking at that Crow Canyon event. And that is all available online. You can navigate to this web link right here, and you can see videos of all of our talks back in 2017. The second thing we did is even more important. After assembling all of this, we were talking with some of our Native colleagues, and they were saying, we're happy to have our voices part of this. We're really, this is very important to us, and we're very delighted to be participating in this with you and collaborating. But for us, it's less appropriate to write about Chaco. It'd be more appropriate to talk about Chaco, and it'd be most appropriate to talk about Chaco on the Chacoan landscape, not in some sterile boardroom somewhere. And we went, that is absolutely a brilliant idea. So because we had access to some wonderful funding from the Park Service, we were able to hire a videographer, Larry Ruiz, whom I mentioned earlier, and some of his team include Daoud Valentine, and they actually filmed us at Crow Canyon. But then we also staged a couple of filming events in Chaco. So here we are in Chaco in October of 2017 with my friend and colleague, Will Sosi, whom I know you heard from in this webinar series earlier in the year, and Ernie Vayo from Acoma. And so we filmed Ernie and Will in Chaco together and apart, talking about the importance of Chaco to them. Will also invited a teacher and some students from Navajo Prep, and we filmed Will talking to the students. They were asking him questions about Chaco and its importance for Dene people, and he was answering, and it's really beautiful So we have a series of 6 or 7 film segments from that filming that is part of the book. They're chapters in the book, but if you go to the website, you just navigate to the link and you can watch the video. But of course, these are just 2 groups, right? I mean, there are many, many, many more descendant communities here that we would like to have as part of this project. So in 2019, we had Octavia Seautua, Curtis Quam, and Presley Haskey from the Zuni Cultural Resources Advisory Team. And we also had Terrence Ota, Sue Koivaya, Ron Wadsworth, and Georgiana Pangziewska from the Hopi Cultural Resources Advisory Task Team. And they came into Chaco with us, and we filmed and talked with them for several days. And again, you can see a lot of that on the website. You can see all of those segments on the website. But what I'd like to do now, actually, with your indulgence, is just stop myself from talking for a few minutes and navigate to one of those clips and let you hear some of Octavius's words, because my Native colleagues express the deep emotional connection and the importance of this sacred landscape so much more eloquently than I ever can or ever will. So let me just bear with me here, the technology, right? I'm going to stop sharing this. I've got it all queued up, so if it works, it will be seamless, and if not, it won't. Okay. Now I need to start sharing this. Okay, and I'm hoping you can all
ancestors were very, very
Octavius.
ingenious. They managed to hold the community together. They managed to raise families, complete ceremonies, and do all the religious obligations that was done here to make sure that this place, the earth, is in harmony and in balance with each other. So it's not just for our benefit. It's not for the benefit of people that come here. It's for the benefit of all the people that will be coming in the future. And so when we hear about all the plans for fracking, really puts this whole valley, the edge that we're sitting on, we might not be here. For us, this is our home. This is where our families are resting. This is where they had their ceremonies, where they had raised their children. And for us to think into the future that it might not be here really puts us in a situation that how can we get people on our side? How can we get people to agree and help us to try and protect this place? So it's very important that not only the Zuni tribe, the Zuni Pueblo, but all the other Pueblos come here and talk about this place, because we need a unified voice. And like everything else within this world, that one single voice will not be heard, but a unified voice will be heard. And that's hopefully that we can accomplish that with what we're doing here.
Okay, you should be back to the PowerPoint now. Those words are so beautiful. We need to speak with a collective voice. One single voice will not be heard, but with a collective voice, we can actually make change. And Octavius is obviously very wise. So again, I feel privileged to have learned so much from my interactions with these folks during that brief filming episode in Chaco. And we'd like to do more. We had to finally kind of put the book out there. And as I'm going to show you in a few minutes, the book's supposed to be out this month. And if it's not this month, it's going to be early next month because it's through all the final indexing and everything at this point. But what we'd like to do, because again, this is a website and it can continue to grow, is continue to film with additional Pueblos, additional Native descendant communities who feel an attachment to this place and who would like to be part of this. We need some additional funding to do that as well, and we're kind of looking around for that. But Carrie Heitman and I have plans to continue this into the future because this for us has been, I think, the most meaningful part of all of this work. So what's happening with this red line? One of the things, as we were all, talking about this with our many, many partners throughout this process over the last, wow, it's been almost a decade now, I guess. What can we do? Like, what should we push for here, given that we know we can't just stop oil and gas drilling, and that's not what we want here. But how do we? Is there something tangible we could ask for? And Archaeology Southwest, in particular, got together with a lot of other Native groups and agencies, and really helped to get organized this idea for a bill that would provide for a 10-year moratorium, or a moratorium on leasing within 10 miles buffer zone around Chaco Canyon. And this is the Chaco Culture Heritage Area Protection Act. It passed in the House in late 2019. It was sponsored by your wonderful representatives from New Mexico. And then it went to the Senate, of course, where it stalled immediately. And as far as I'm aware, it's still sitting there in the Senate. So it's Senate Bill 1079. Again, now, even if this passes, this doesn't do anything for all of the blue areas that have already been leased, but it would at least be something to say, hey, particularly really close to the park within this really sensitive area. And you can see here the way they drew the line. They encompass some really important outliers like Piers, or like Kenya'a here, Quinviniola here, Pueblo Pintado here. Can we please not lease anymore? Thank you very much. So if this is of concern to you, at this point in the talk, I often have a lot of people asking, what can I do? So this is just an informational page to show you, here are some of the things you can do. Now, we have, as Michelle said at the outset, we have a bang-up new Secretary of the Interior, thank goodness, and a new administration. And I am really hopeful that there will be a meaningful shift towards continued and greater protections for the greater Chaco landscape now that we have this new administration and now that we have Deb Haaland in there. But these are some things that you can do. You can support any of these fine organizations, including Crow Canyon, another fine organization that has been a strong advocate and a strong partner in these efforts. You can also directly contact the Committee on Energy and National Resources. Go to your senator or go to this committee and ask them to support this bill. But maybe most importantly, what you can do is you can share the knowledge that Chaco is not just the canyon. Chaco doesn't stop at the edges of the current national park. It's, again, the size of the state of Alabama, and so much that's out there we have not studied, we do not understand, and Native people have not been consulted and have not been provided with opportunities to think about and share their perspectives on it. So we really need to facilitate all of that before any more leasing goes forward. So that's where I will leave things. Thank you to so many collaborators and good friends. This is really not just my work. This is the work of many, many, many other people, particularly Carrie Heitman and Steve Lexon, whom I mentioned before, but also all of the folks listed here. And again, particularly the Native collaborators from Zuni, Hopi, and Dene and Acoma that I mentioned. I really, really appreciate all of you. I'm sorry I'm running out of juice. I'm very tired. It's been a very long day. So I will just leave it at that. Know that even if I didn't name you here, you have my heartfelt appreciation. All the collaborators and participants in the volume, my heartfelt appreciation. I will go ahead and stop and attempt to answer any questions that you may have. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ruth. You're getting a lot of love in the chat and in the comments. That was a great talk, and I learned something new every time I listen to you. We do have a bunch of questions. So your discussion about what we can do about the oil and gas situation was so compelling. And we have a few questions about that. Basically, what can the new administration, what have they done? What can they do? What do you see changing?
I mean, it's such early days, right? So I don't. I mean, I would hope that we could actually pass this bill, but I don't know. I think. I mean, what would be really nice would be to see the BLM in particular make sure that all of the groups are consulted, that all the descendant communities are fully consulted before any new leases happen anywhere across the basin. And it would be really nice if they would push the legal requirements to actually do large scale landscape level inventory of cultural resources before leases are granted. And that's something that, as I understand it, and I'm really fuzzy when it comes to the actual ways some of the CRM business works. But as I understand it, they could push more in that direction, but they're simply choosing not to. They're simply choosing to allow things to proceed in a piecemeal fashion. And I really wish that instead we could have, okay, we're going to undertake like a landscape level survey of everything between Chaco Canyon and Highway 550. That would be a huge multi-million-dollar project, right? But oil companies are making billions here, so they should need to pay for it, and archaeologists should need to be employed to go do it, and we should get a really good sense of what's out there before more leases are granted. So that's the kind of thing that it would be nice. So it'd be nice if the new administration could put some pressure on their various agencies to do those kinds of things. But I mean, it's such early days, so I have no idea.
Right. Okay. All right, and then we have some nitty-gritty questions, fun questions about Chaco. Somebody asked about the acoustic area near Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon. And maybe you could just talk about that a little bit. And also their question specifically was, is anyone studying the music they might have been playing and the role of music in their daily lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, some of my colleagues, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, particularly John Stein, Taft Blackhorse, Richard Luce, there might have been a couple others. Those are the ones that spring to mind. They were working on this in Chaco Canyon, and they did some really cool experiments. Some of these experiments involved playing different kinds of music in the canyon against. There's a rock face that's behind Pueblo Bonito, between Pueblo Bonito and Chetroketl, and apparently the shape of it is such that it reflects sound in a certain way that makes it, louder and kind of creepier, I guess, or something, something really kind of emotional happens when you listen to this really loud music in this place. Anyway, they were doing experiments and they've written some things about it. I don't have the references off the top of my head, but they published them in various places like the Archaeological Society papers of like University of New Mexico. So if somebody's really interested, email me and I'll try to find those references for you. I should have that off the top of my head, but I just don't. Like I said, it's been a long day. And then the other question about specific musical instruments, again, that's actually something I looked into it, and somebody's written a dissertation about this. And I can't think of her name right now, but she has, and it might be the whole Southwest, not just Chaco, but it was a really interesting dissertation that I think came out of Brown. Anyway, email me and I can send you the reference. So that's happening, but we don't have a lot. I mean, not a lot of research has been focused in that direction. So it would be really interesting to do more, right? The conch shell trumpets, again, I would direct you to the work of Witt and Primo. We have conch shell trumpets. We know they had them, right? And so they did some really interesting modeling there to see what that would sound like. And Richard Luce in particular, I'm remembering now, he's published some things where he's made conch shell trumpets, like replicas, and blown them and experimented that way. And he's also done some experiments in Great Kivas, like I think the Great Kiva at Aztec, which if you've been there, about the neat acoustical properties of that place, and has done some measurements there that suggest that, Great Kivas do interesting things to sound, right? That to amplify it or to, trying to remember now, I believe that the particular decibel levels, it kind of lulls you, it kind of calms you, kind of like if you do meditation and you're saying Om or a mantra over and over. Apparently it affects the same part of the brain. Anyway, I referred you to his article, which has the correct specifics, not whatever I'm babbling right now. So that's what I know, and I'm happy to share references or connect you to more resources about that too, if you like.
Okay. And this is sort of a related question. Somebody asked, and I know the answer to this, but I'll let you talk about it, whether you actually blew the conch shell in your research at Piers. And maybe you want to talk about why that might not work.
Yeah, we did this all inside the computer. And so I don't actually have a conch shell trumpet replica. Like first you'd have to make the replica, which as I said, Richard Luce actually did. And I mean, the advantage of having this sort of high-tech way to address these issues is that you can recreate different kinds of conditions. And you can also place ears, virtual ears on different parts of the landscape. Like with the shrine study, when we were looking at the signaling, it would be pretty much impossible to coordinate, and it would be possible to get permission to have 280 some people on top of all of those high places at the same time trying to flash mirrors at each other, right? But we could model it in the computer. So same thing kind of with the conch shell trumpet. It's just a lot easier to model it in the computer. That's not to say it wouldn't be fun to try some experiments though. So step one would be to make some conch shell trumpets. Step two would be to learn to blow them. I understand it's actually not that hard, but you do have to have some forceful air behind it. Then step three would be to actually, get permission to go out and be on the landscape and record what you would hear. And I think that'd be a really fun thing to try, but I haven't done it yet.
And somebody else asked, would the noise of the wells interfere with that kind of experiment?
Yeah. I may not have mentioned, one of the reasons we went down this road was because when we were up there doing our viewscape studies, that well was really loud. It was backfiring and you could hear it like, and it turned out, we complained actually, and it turned out that the BLM called the drill company and something had gone wrong in the engine and it needed a new muffler. And so they replaced the muffler and it's quieter now. But yeah, the point is that what should be a sacred place, obviously in the past it was not a quiet place. There were people there, right? There would have been dogs and turkeys and kids and but in today when you go out there, you don't want to hear heavy machinery clanking and you don't want to see just drill rigs everywhere and feel like you're in an industrial park. To me, that really dishonors the emotional kind of visceral connection that I feel as an archaeologist to the place. And I'm not a Native American, so I can only imagine how upset Native people are when they see that kind of use put to the landscape of their ancestors.
Mm-hmm. We had a question about kivas. There are so many of them at so many of these communities. And do they all serve the same purpose? Are there different kinds maybe?
Yeah, that's a huge question, actually. Kivas are small kivas, yes. During Chaco times, inside of great houses, there are these enclosed kivas. Sometimes they're on second stories. They're tower kivas. I guess I could say it's probably a safe bet that they were all for some kind of special use, at least some of the time. And it's particularly enclosed kivas in the great houses are a Chaco thing. But of course, small kivas continue in time after Chaco, and they, of course, are around before Chaco. So I'm losing the thread of the original question. The gist of it is that they probably weren't all the same all the time. Okay, there probably are variations in terms of what's going on in kivas, but I think it's almost certain that this is a special room. This isn't just like your basic living room. So people are meeting there. Maybe it's particular societies, maybe it's particular clans, maybe it's, particular songs are being learned or things are being prepared in kivas. You probably know that today in Pueblo society, kivas are special places where certain things go on that not everyone has access to, but that varies across the season of the year. So so I don't think I certainly don't know what happened in every single kiva in Chaco. I think it's a lot of different things, but I hope that at least gives you some semblance of a sense of what archaeologists understand about it.
Yeah, and I guess I can give a shout out to a webinar we had earlier this year with Susan Ryan and I think Lyle Valenqua and Steve Lexon talking about kivas for an hour.
Great. So watch that webinar, and I will watch that webinar too, and we'll learn so much.
Somebody asked when you're talking about the mirror experiments, what would the Chacoans have used for that kind of communication?
That's a great question, because I forgot to mention that. Yeah. So Chacoans have access to this shiny mineral that's eroding out of the shale all over the place. It's called selenite, and it's flashy. And interestingly enough, in a lot of these places where you've got these features on high places, there's selenite. So it might have been that. It might have been. There have been some experiments done, again, probably not widely published, but back in the 80s, I think some people, I'm sorry, I'm just tired. It's been a long day and I can't remember her name, but there were some experiments that happened in the 80s with flashing selenite, and it seemed to work. But that was actually looking at towers in and around Hovenweep, not at Chaco. So, I mean, anybody out there, I know there's probably a lot of great Chaco and Southwest scholars out there, so feel free to jump in here and help me out.
Okay, another question. Kellum would like to know what differences you see between the northern and southern halves of the Chacoan world from the perspective of archaeology.
You know what? That's really a question for Kellum. So, I mean, Kellum, as you know, my old advisor, your academic grandfather, Dr. Gwen Vivian, wrote a whole book about that. And I think it's highly likely that there are important differences in terms of community configuration and potentially in terms of, especially early on as Chaco is just forming, it seems like some communities are all about building the proto-great house, whereas other communities are all about coalescing around a great kiva. And, there might be some kind of patterning happening there, but my brain is not in a place to think about that any more deeply right now. So I would love to have a beer with you and at some time when I am better rested and we can discuss it further. Sorry, that's a lame answer, but that's what I got.
Well, here's an easier question for you. Does Chimney Rock fit into your visibility scheme that you discussed?
Oh, yeah. So again, Steve Lexon did some research there along with a wonderful graduate student from Colorado. Boy, I'm sorry. I just can't. What's her name? Help me out, Michelle.
Brenda.
Thank you, Brenda Todd. Yeah, and they did excavation. They were doing some stabilization excavation for the Park Service, and one of the things that Steve's talked about, and I think I cite him for this, that he found a term paper written by a student from Farmington who'd actually done experiments. But anyway, long story short, you can flash from Pueblo Alto to Huerfano Mesa, right? And you can see Huerfano Mesa from Chimney Rock. So Chimney Rock is dialed in via Huerfano Mesa straight back to Chaco. And yeah, and of course, when we did our GIS modeling, there was a connection there. So yeah, that works.
Okay. All right. I think we're sort of winding down and it's 5:10. So I think we can sort of call it a day. Thank you so much, Ruth. This was fantastic. And our viewers really enjoyed it. And it was so nice to see you.
I always enjoy talking about it. So I really appreciate everybody's attention today. And if I couldn't answer all your questions and you want to know more, or if you have comments or you have suggestions or things I got wrong or whatever, feel free to email me and I'm happy to continue the conversation. So thanks a lot, everybody.
There's lots of discussion about citations and things you mentioned. So you might get some more questions too.
Yeah, I'll just ask, is there a way for Crow Canyon to just centrally provide a lot of that? Like if I send you guys something, can you post it somewhere so people can get it? Or should I just communicate with people individually?
If you want to send me some references tonight, I can include it in the follow-up email that's going out to everyone, particularly your book that's coming out this spring. We have a lot of questions about that.
Great. Okay. I will do that.
Thank you so much.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Ruth.
Bye.
All right. Bye.